Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to WEC Conversations, the last edition of this year, 2025. And it's really a highlight today because we are publishing the WEC regulatory report as well as the outlook for regulatory developments. And this is a very exciting moment, of course, for all of us because we can look together at our aggregate data and discuss together the findings and what it means and how we can use better this tool in our daily work, both at the regional and global level, but also at national level. And there are some innovations in this year's edition. So the focus continues to be on agency work regulation as WEC's historical focus area. But the world is evolving and also WEC is evolving. And with that, our regulatory report also shall evolve. So this year, for the first time, we have included in the survey that you have all received questions on employer of record regulation, and we have compiled that into a dedicated section in this year's report. So it's a great moment because it shows that our organization is evolving together with the industry, and we are getting additional insights on very detailed regulatory topics. And so I think it's a great thing to continue developing that area, going further in the regulatory report development. Just looking towards next year, we are going to work with some legal experts in the network. Many of you are there today in this call. To further develop and revise the structure of the questions that we are gathering. So it's both in terms of the data we are collecting, how it makes sense to collect that, thematically organize so that it makes the most sense in the findings. And then secondly, how that is presented in the report itself. So there is, of course, the aggregate element, but also that we provide as much as possible comparative data and tools for all your work. So thank you for being here, and thank you, of course, for all the contributions to the report. And I now give over to Michael to present this year's regulatory report. Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much, Minna, and warm welcome also from my side as the one who has been leading this project in this year as well as in the previous years. And as Minna said, this report is a new edition in a series of reports, and we are for the first time also covered EOR in the report. So what I want to do in the next couple of minutes is to give you an overview of the main findings, and then we have an exchange of view on the report, and also we want to get some feedback from members on how to improve it further. I will then briefly present a guide from the ILO on prayers, which aims to support a positive regulation. I welcome to this call from Ius Laboris, Deborah, who will introduce how Ius Laboris can help you in shaping regulation at national level, and then, of course, we have some closing remarks. If you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to contact us via the chat. Otherwise, we have some interaction moments as we go along. So over to report 2025. As said, it was a report being done in a survey among all our members, and we did it over summer in June, July, and early September. We were very grateful for having a large number of replies, actually a similar number of replies as last year. But before that, why do we do it? First of all, without data on our industry, without regulation on our industry, we are nowhere. As a former colleague of mine once said, no data, no voice. But also, no data, no support to fellow members. So if we don't have the data, we can support, we can serve you. And finally, I can tell you this report is at the backbone of our European and global advocacy and our advocacy in other regions. So we really use this report as a backbone for position papers, for briefings, for presentations. So no data, no advocacy. Therefore, thank you to all our members who have contributed to the report, and we really welcome this contribution. We know it's a long survey, we know it's heavy, but we really need this data. In terms of business scope, in the past, we focused this report and this survey on agency work. We now have moved into a broader range of services because we realize there are also challenges in other segments. So for the first time, we now cover EUR, and we had a long discussion with colleagues whether EUR should be a separate section or whether it should be within agency work. We decided to have it in agency work, but specified as a segment of services. We see it more as a business line rather than a different regulation chapter. And therefore, it's in Chapter 7, and we cover it there as a triangle work relationship, similar to agency work with some differences. Moving forward to geographies, I mentioned it already. Many members have contributed to the report. Many members have provided their input. And we have a almost similar level of replies with 2 new additions, Czech Republic and Luxembourg, thanks to those members who have first time. And of course, we have all the big markets covered. And I see here on the call, we have Norway we have covered, we have France covered, we have Netherlands covered. So we really cover all the big markets, and this is important to do what we do, being an authoritative voice of the industry. I know this slide is always very texty and very busy, but I just want to give you an overview of the main findings. As said, most focus on agency work, and there we see the strong level of regulation, heavy regulation in most countries globally on all the indicators that have been identified. So conditions for establishment, conditions for use, working conditions, social protection, and collective bargaining. I will not dive now deep into every single finding, but this just shows you that the overall level of regulation is high, that we have the most regulated form of flexible work, and that the regulation elements are actually quite stable. So there are changes in evolution of regulation, but the main elements are similar. Diving into the first one, we have seen that agency work is now allowed in all countries surveyed. There are still heavy restrictions in Mexico, but in all countries there is some form of work related to agency work, and we see also a large number of countries requiring licensing system authorization schemes, which is on the one hand a good thing because it allows for a sound development of the industry, but it also poses some challenges because that implies the question of which conditions are attached to a licensing system or licensing scheme. But in general, we have been always supportive of this element of regulation. Here you see the obligations for establishment in a kind of diagram chart. So licensing systems in 36% of countries, registration with public authority in 36, and in some countries it's depending on the regional level, and there's only 2 who have others. So it's quite common, but with some differences according to countries. Conditions for use of agency work. The most common ones are bans on assignments, so sectoral bans, occupational bans, and others, bans on replacing striking workers, obligation of agency work use, so reasons for use, quite common. Maximum of assignments is also a very common restriction or condition, and in several countries, these last 2 reasons for use and length of assignment are also combined, like in France, and Mathilde can tell more about it later on. So here again, you see the main findings on limitations on types of services, on reporting obligations, and others. So really, we see again a strong level of regulation on conditions for use of agency work across the countries that we have surveyed. On these, there are some of restrictions that we are considering as doubtful or unjustified. For example, the sectoral bans, not the ban on replacing striking workers, but really the sectoral bans for certain sectors like construction or public sector, and we are working with national federations to get these removed. Here you find an overview of the prevalence and the strength of restrictions in according to country replies. So you see the most common one is the joint liability. Then comes the bans. including the ban of cycling workers, then maximum for assignments and reasons for use. Again, we try to quantify the relevance of certain elements of regulation to give you an overview of where do we stand globally and do a comparative overview across countries. On working conditions, of course, one of the key elements in our industry, and you all know it, is equal treatment, equal pay, and as well as social protection, access and coverage. And it's important that 3/4 of the survey replies have recognized Asian work as a special contract, and the vast majority of countries have recognized the equal treatment, equal pay in some form or shape. Now, I'm saying some form or shape here because based on my advocacy at European level, it's very clear that there are a huge level of differences between countries, and there are derogations, there are different definitions. So there's one principle, but there are many different forms and shapes on how this is being applied at the national level. And also, protection access is quite common, but we'll come to that one later. Working conditions are mostly determined by national regulation, but we also see some elements of user companies or of collective bargaining and collective agreements covering these elements of regulation. Equal treatment, equal pay. Here you see an overview of the replies of members, so mostly at national level, sometimes regional level, and sometimes in CLAs or at client company level. And as a large number of countries has some element of regulation on equal pay, 89%. Derogations are much less common, but are very important for a couple of countries like Germany, like Netherlands, and Sweden in Europe, because derogations doesn't mean per se lower pay, but finding a different balance between pay and other benefits, combining pay with open-ended contracts, providing pay between assignments. So I do always question the wording derogation, because derogation sounds like going lower, but in fact it means finding a new balance of regulation on pay and working conditions. These are also at European level embedded in EU law, but of course also outside Europe you find according regulation in national regulation. On social protection, that's one of the elements that is most contested and most debated across Europe and across the world. And here we see that actually Asian work is almost on par to working and working conditions, and we see a strong level of protection across the different branches of social protection. And it's important also to underline that social protection is, in addition to statutory elements, is linked to social dialogue and social protection schemes. So there again, we do play a role in the industry to provide these access. Here you find an overview about the different branches of social protection access: unemployment benefits, maternity and paternity leave benefits, support for training, childcare, and you see that the access is overall quite stable, but you see also improvements on a couple of indicators. And overall, I do see a rather upward trend than a downward trend. And so this is a positive sign for the industry, providing access to protection for the workers. Social protection and social dialogue are closely linked. And we see that 3/4 of the surveyed countries have some form of social dialogue and collective bargaining at national level or sectoral level, and 45% have a specific have some regulation on social dialogue and collective bargaining. Asian work wages are health and safety and training are the most common elements of social dialogue, knowing, of course, that in many countries equal treatment is provided by law, and that it's more the extra benefits and the extra protection elements that are dealt with by collective bargaining. Sectoral social funds, training funds, social protection funds and social benefits funds are quite common in Europe, but they are focused on a couple of countries, 8 to 9 countries, and here we see that social dialogue and defining is the fundament, it's the basis of effective social dialogue. And then we also have self-regulation as an important element, which we surveyed, and we see that 72% of the surveyed countries have some elements of self-regulation, compliance, and enforcement. And here I can tell you from our advocacy at European and global level that discussions on self-regulation are very important to showcase that our industry is a responsible employer and to also differentiate us from other providers on the labor market who are not as compliant as we are as sector. Just yesterday, I spoke at an event on labor mobility and legal migration, and there I was happy to showcase some examples of self-regulation or collective bargaining that help to protect migrant workers. So again, this is beneficial for the industry and helpful to showcase. As said, deep dive on employer of record. We have the main findings here in the report. We have 45%, 55% representing EUR as segment. We have respondents saying that national regulation provides for a clear definition of EUR, but this is only 14%, so it's quite low, I would say. And only 11% have a dedicated EUR regulation in their countries. All the others are using agency regulation. And again, giving you some insights from the global European lobbying, to some extent, EUR still feels like the agency of the 20 to 30 years ago, which is very much contested and challenged. But of course, this hopefully will change over time with more acceptance, and as that data and facts can be the basis of acceptance and better recognition of the services. EUR was covered for the first time, so we have also realized in the survey that there was some difference in understanding and in consideration of EUR. We worked with our public access network global as well as with some EUR players to define it in a clear way. But of course, Minna said at the beginning we want to revise the survey next year. We would be happy to work with players in the EUR field to make it more concrete, more precise, and also to expand the scope of questions that we have on EUR. With that, I will stop here, and I will give the floor to a discussion with members attending the webinar, and I will ask first Mathilde to present her views and her assessment of the survey and the report. Here you
yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for giving me the floor to talk about you today about the French experience on the use of a regulatory report. It started at the beginning of this year because the board of Prism'emploi met for a seminar in February, and to define its strategy for 2025. And we agreed to highlight the archaic nature of the French legislation on agency work, which remain almost unchanged since the 90s. Therefore, I use the report to identify some countries to make a comparison, mostly with bordering France. And then the main regulatory elements that are outdated in France in terms of need for an agile and a flexible labor market. And once this comparison table has been drawn up, the first step was to hold a press conference to present Prism'emploi proposals for a responsible and more adequate legal framework with the aim of relaxing certain regulatory restrictions. The next steps were letters, meetings, and we used to present our proposal in more concrete terms. Finally, the previous government, as you know, in France, it's a little bit complicated for the moment. So the previous government has agreed to open negotiations at cross-border, cross-sectoral level. Sorry, so now it stopped, but Prism'emploi continues to spread the message that temporary work regulation has not changed in over 30 years. And while other more flexible forms of employment are developing without any or less legal framework. So that's the way we use the regulatory report from last year.
Of course, you can't use this one's edition because it just was released. Is there anything that you would like to see being different for next year? Is there anything in terms of presenting data, in terms of looking at global or regions? Is there anything which you feel should be done differently?
I think it would be more useful for me to separate between Europe and other part of the world because we are more close to European legislation than other countries. For example, America or South Australia or something like that. So it's more efficient for me to compare with European countries.
Mm-hmm. And is there any indicator that you feel is definitely missing? I know that it's always a fine balance between, on the one hand, adding more to the survey and then getting the comment from especially smaller federations that it becomes a very long survey. And this is indeed one of the longest surveys that we are doing. Is there any indicator that you feel from the French perspective is really needed, it's really missing in the survey?
For me, it was missing the information about the waiting period. So we have this in France, but I don't know exactly. I know in Belgium, for example, there is some, but I don't, or Germany also. But I would like to have an overview about all countries, and also I think it. For me, it's not much the indicator that is important for me than the fact that I can have concrete and deep details about the legislation in the language that I can use. So it's more a quality answer that I need than an indicator.
Laura, over to you. I mean, the Dutch are one of the biggest federations in Europe, but of course you also face a lot of challenges and issues on regulation, on agency work, but also on other forms of flexible work. So over to you and your assessment of the report. And I'm hearing your camera is not working, so you're with us, but without picture.
Yes, so my apologies for that. I don't know what went wrong. As many of you might know, is that in the Netherlands we have fairly good regulation at this moment for agency work. So we have flexible contracts, and there's negotiations with unions, well, with one union at this moment. So the environment for agencies is pretty good and flexible and open. forms like EOR, open-end contract, everything is possible here for agencies, and also the social protection for agency workers is the same as if you were to work directly for a company in an open-end contract. But what we do see is that we now face some more restrictions in regulations, that in politics they are talking about introducing new, maybe a waiting period, reasons of use, maybe they want to forbid to send agency workers to the meat sector like they do in Germany. So we use the research in a different way. We first of all, we can see from the research what kind of restrictions or what kind of legislation there is for agencies in other countries. Everything is opening up more because of in Brussels, of course, but also internet makes it easier to find out what other countries have for rules and regulations. So we see some copying behavior in the Netherlands. Well, the example in the meat sector was very clear one in that one. So we can use the research to find out what kind of restrictions we might face, and we can kind of prepare and see what we can do to avoid these restrictions. And on the other hand, we use it, for instance, about a year ago, they were talking about reasons for use in the Netherlands, and we could see in the research which countries do have reasons for use. And it's fairly easy then, because we attend many meetings and the conference, so we know the people working for the other members of WEC, and it's really easy for us to reach out to these members and ask what kind of reasons of use do you have? Is it positive? What would you change? If you were to introduce it now, how would you do it differently? So it's easier to connect with our colleagues abroad to find out about their regulations, and then again use that in our advantage to make sure that if any changes come, we can at least give the arguments and the experience that they have in other countries. And I've also experienced this vice versa, that we get, as ABU, receive questions from other federations asking us how we've arranged something or what kind of aspects they should take in account if something would be changed in their country.
Very clear.
So that's, yeah.
That's very clear. Any ideas, any recommendations on what should be changed for the coming years? Is there any element missing? Is there anything that should be changed in terms of structure or order? What is your view on how to move forward and how to improve?
No, not really that I can think of. That would mean, for me, it would mean you would go more into depth, so deeper into the topic, and I'm not sure if the research is appropriate for that. So,
well, this is the challenge we face, because it's a broad survey and the input comes from our national federations, and the more we go into depth, the more we ask from our members to complete. And we have opted, under the leadership of my previous colleagues, Jochen, who has now joined Adecco Group, we opted for something that is easy to complete for our federations, knowing that in some countries this is only one person running a federation. But of course, that's the balance between going in depth, being broad, and being most appropriate for global, national, and European needs. Is there anybody else who has comments or questions on this survey or the findings I presented? I would love to pick a few colleagues, but Marius, yeah, I had you in mind already. Thank you for.
Well, thank you. I can wait if you want to.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I always represent the niche players in the WEC. Before with Kelly, it was the MSP, and now I'm talking about EOR. So I'm really grateful to see EOR in the report, of course. Thank you so much for doing that. Some comments on the content. It's useful and helpful. I think I want to have some dialogue for the next one in terms of whether to group EOR with agency work, because that's what it tends to happen from a regulation perspective, but it's not really always a good thing. For example, I am now employed by Paracar under EUR in Norway, which means I can only work for them for 3 years technically. So it's not always for temporary, right? So in many cases, it's intended as a permanent or at least indefinite solution, and that needs to be clarified a little bit. I also think saying that 14, I can't remember the exact percentage, but saying that 14% feels like the regulation is appropriate is not as useful as saying that 86% think it's not appropriate. So I would turn some of those numbers on their heads, but that's just a preference. I think the end result is the same. Besides, like I said, I'm really grateful to see EUR covered specifically this year.
Okay.
I'm happy to work with you guys on refining the content, of course, for the future.
Thank you. Any other member wanting to take the floor or provide some comments? Maybe Danilo, if you have some ideas.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael, for sharing this research with us. So in Brazil, I'm actually in US because I work in between these two countries. But in Brazil, we have like a lot of regulations, and it's not pretty good for us, for our sector, because it's like in excess, you know. For example, for temp works, we need to hire him and keep them working with us just for 6 months and not in more. You know, you have excess regulation that doesn't matter if you have the demand in some client. You just need to stop and say for the temp, the employee, sorry, because of the regulation, you need to stop working here. So, and about the rights for the temps, they are, if we compare, for example, here with US, it's a lot of things that we have there. And I really believe that we need to try move it to improve our environment and help the two sides, the companies, the staffing agencies, and for the employees as well. So it's very good to see how these things works in other continents and in other countries, that we can share this with our government and try change a little for better to help everyone.
That's good to hear. And of course, we're always happy to help and to support you in national or regional advocacy. Many of you will know that we had at WEC and WEC Europe for many, many years a committee on public affairs at European level. We have then created 2 years ago a network for our global public affairs members, because we realized we cannot do public affairs at global level without involving members proactively. And we have just recently elected a chair for this network, which is Martin Klingen from Germany and from GI Group. And Martin, I see you on the call, so maybe you can say a few words on how you see this report as the incoming new chair of our GPAN network, and of course coming from Germany, which is also a country that has been facing many restrictions and regulations that the German Federation did not like a sectoral ban in the meat sector or construction sector. So Martin, floor over to you.
Thank you, Michael, and hello everybody. Sorry that I can't switch on my camera. I'm still traveling. I'm very late with the flight from Berlin to Düsseldorf. Sorry. Indeed, coming from the German perspective, we faced a lot of regulations, but we also were in a status where our sector only reacted to new regulations coming instead of proactively approaching and pushing for deregulation, or let's say at least a flexibilization of our industry, being recognized as a problem solver for the needs of the labor market. I think therefore the report is super useful and should be more used for proactive public affairs management, and this is what we need to ensure, both on the European, on the global, but also on the national levels, that we proactively do the advocacy for our sector, answering to the needs of the labor markets, which is for sure the skill shortage, which is a question of quality standards, which are new forms of work, platform, AI, etc. So this is where we should use this report, which I appreciate a lot. I think I already gave you the feedback some days ago, Michael, and all of us should be asked on national, European, and global level. And for sure, this is our task in the Global Public Affairs Network, and also for me as a chair to use this report and all the information in a proactive way with the policymakers.
Any ideas on improvements or changes to the report? Anything you feel was missing?
No, to be honest, I didn't have anything to add. At the end, probably the report is quite heavy in terms of contents, and maybe could be an idea to have sort of excerpt or executive summary for the day-to-day use. Huh?
That's a very, very valid point. Of course, the report, and that was a decision taken by the board a couple of years ago, the report so far is not public. It's a report being shared with our members or the members area. But we have decided on the WEC governance level that we don't publish a report. I would be happy to at least have a discussion at board level whether this element of keeping it confidential should remain as strict as it is currently, because indeed the report serves as backbone and as ingredient for public activities, but it would be sometimes useful to just take one slide or take a section of slides and use them publicly. Of course, we do this here and there, but it would be nice to get some more membership alignment on how far can we go public with it, because in the end, I always compare this report having been a researcher myself some 20 years ago. I consider it as a gold mine, which has a lot of data for somebody who's a researcher, but of course it's still closed. It's not yet no light inside, so it's difficult to use if it stays on the members area. But this is something that Minna and Gabriela will take to the excos and boards to decide there. I would like to move now on to Deborah from Ius Laboris, a partner of WEC and WEC Europe for a couple of years, and we are very happy that you are here today. You have been a kind of permanent partner at Ius Laboris to our WEC on the regulatory report. And this time I would like to ask you, how can Ius Laboris as a network of labor lawyers help our members in shaping regulation, in working with governments on addressing restrictions? You heard from France, the waiting period, it's also an issue in other countries. You heard from me about sectoral bans. So what kind of support can you offer? And of course, support doesn't mean pro bono, it can be subject to a fee, but how can we work together to shape regulation that is contributing to business growth?
Well, good afternoon and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Just want to say that the regulatory report is a fantastic piece of work, and it's a real testament to everybody involved and to the WEC itself. I should just introduce myself, I guess. I'm head of research at Ius Laboris, and as Michael says, we're an employment law alliance. We cover 58 countries, and we have our head office of about 10 people in Brussels. So we're actually quite a good match to the WEC in those respects. We've been working closely with the WEC for the last 3 or 4 years, and we've done a number of things together. We've contributed to the regulatory report in previous years, not this year, but in a couple of previous years. We've spoken at webinars of yours and your annual conference in Lisbon. So Michael, you also consulted us a little while ago on an Italian case at the ECJ that was of importance to you. And what we do is, when you have something like that, you get in touch with me. I find you the right person to talk to, and that's how we begin. So in answer to your question, that's really the process. We've also collaborated on some research. We did a piece together on gender equality in a green and technological age recently, and we do all this in the context of a partnership agreement that we have. But I think it would also be useful to just explain in general terms who we are as an organization. We, like WEC, are pretty global. We cover 58 countries directly, which means we have members in those countries, and those are member law firms. And we have good relationships with a further 60, so we can virtually cover the world, really. And most of the members we have are sort of a match with the members that you have. So we're pretty much aligned in that respect. There's a couple of countries that we don't have or you don't have, but we're pretty much aligned. We're 25 years old, so you're a bit older than us, but we're a membership organisation like you, and our members in each country, as I say, are law firms, and we choose the single best law firm in the country, and you can check that on Chambers and Partners and things. We're usually band 1, and we're way above all our competitors on Chambers and the lawyer and all those sort of measures of lawyers. So it's objectively verifiable. And we work together on international projects quite a lot. One thing that is a bit different about us from international law firms generally, I'm not sure whether this is exactly a selling point, but we find it useful ourselves, which is that we genuinely know each other, and we do a lot of activities together. So just for instance, a few weeks ago, we all got together to do something that we do every year. It's called Impact Week, and we do a charitable or sustainable activity. And this kind of creates cohesion across our alliance. And we also run training courses for junior lawyers so that everybody is aware of everything that's going on. We cover, in terms of our services, we cover the whole gamut of employment legislation. So going from recruitment right through the sort of employment journey onto dismissals, pensions. We do advise temporary work agencies as part of that. And we also include immigration and global mobility, data privacy, internal investigations, and tax, which is sort of the framework around which employment law sits. So that's probably enough as an initial introduction as to who we are, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say, if you need any help with any labour or employment issues in your countries, then the thing to do is to send Michael an email, and he'll contact me, and we'll work out the best person to talk to you about whatever it is. So just to say in conclusion, very much enjoying working with the WEC, and we want to deepen our collaboration even more next year. And so we're going to be involved in your annual conference in Toronto, and we really hope to see you all there.
And maybe just one thing I would like to highlight, many of us in the public affairs lobbying field know that it's all about speed and react quickly. And what I really appreciate with Ius Laboris and working with Deborah was that we got a response and we got impact very quickly. It was a question of days or weeks, and we had the legal assessment that we needed. And this is maybe a good sign to all of those of you who are on the call and all those who will be listening to the recording of this webinar later on. Ius Laboris is really there as a fast-track support, of course, depending on the agenda of the lawyers in the countries. But I really appreciate the reactiveness and the speed of insight that you have provided to us. Is there any question from our members or any question from my colleagues at Head Office to Deborah? Beatrice, you are managing the partnership. Is there anything you would like to add?
I think everything that I could add, Deborah already knows, and I could not echo more of what you both said about the partnership and about the excellent work that is being carried out. So yeah, this is it for me.
Well, I'll just add one more thing, which is that we have been we ourselves have been talking about EORs as well quite a lot, and we just put something out yesterday afternoon. I'll just share my screen if that's all right with you. Can you see that? It's employers of record key considerations before leasing labour, and it's just a thing with a drop down of 25 countries, I think, and how are they interpreted? What EORs and what happens if what happens if an EOR engages in labour leasing activities, and consequences, penalties for each of those countries, and then a sort of map of the world and things. I'll stop sharing that, but I can just put the thing in the chat in case anyone's interested, as it seems to be a topic of interest.
Thank you very much for sharing this. Of course, topic of interest, because we discussed it just earlier on. But there's another piece I would like to highlight from Ius Laboris, which I just recently used, which is the work that you've been done on pay transparency, on the pay transparency directive, where I also saw some comparative overviews of countries. And pay transparency directive is something that is of key concern to our members, and especially our corporate members, because it's one of these directives which came to our agenda, which we discussed, but where we were struggling to assess the business impact in the early phase. And now we have a directive that requires companies to ensure pay transparency between women and men. And for our sector, agency work, the conditions are set at the clients, but we as employers of the workers are held liable for ensuring pay transparency and pay equality. Yeah. And this is a big issue for our members, and especially the multinational corporates like Adecco, Randstad, and Manpower. They are deeply concerned how this is going to be affect their business in real terms on the ground. We have provided some guidance to federations on the points to look at in the transposition phase. But if you have any insights or any views on this directive, that would be very helpful to our members.
Yeah, again, I'll share my screen just quickly. We have a service called Pay Gap IQ, which enables you to contact our lawyers basically, and you can put in information, and we have statisticians who will work out what you need to do if there's a discrepancy, what steps you need to take, and how to deal with it across your organization. It's a massive amount of the work that we're doing at the moment, advising people in Europe about that issue. But it's a bit like the GDPR. It goes beyond Europe. There are lots of countries dealing with this as well in different ways, and so yeah, it's a massive part of what we're doing at the moment. So if anyone does want to consult us about that, then you'd be very welcome.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question or any other comment from anybody on the webinar? If not, I will go quickly back to my PowerPoint, because I will not end this webinar without talking very briefly about the support that you can get from us as WEC and WEC Europe. I will, of course, not repeat all my presentation. Give me 1 second. So how can we support you in terms of regulation? We by now have, after 20 years of head office secretariat in Brussels, we have a broad range of tools. And sometimes I realized it started as a tree, it became a forest, and it now is almost a jungle. So please, if you have questions on regulation, the first entry point is to get back to Beatrice and myself. We are the 2 public affairs persons here at the team who deal most with regulation. Of course, the report would not have been realized without Victoria. And I want to thank you, Victoria, for the work you have been doing in terms of data collection, data analysis, and data presentation. And Aurelie, you have been helping us in making the data visual and having a nice report. But we have much more tools on regulation. We have the Zero, which I mentioned at the beginning, giving an outlook of regulation change in Europe. We have a network of stakeholders in Brussels and in Geneva at the ILO, whom you can contact to lobby on regulation at global level. And we are also happy to help you at a national level. Of course, our Work We Want campaign and research is still relevant and appropriate as a tool to shape regulation. And a final point I would like to highlight here from this very heavy slide are the national federations playbooks. These are playbooks that we developed 2 years ago, and they are designed to build capacity of national federations and to help you to become more effective, more efficient in your advocacy role. And I always know that putting a tool on the shelf isn't the best thing, but I just want to remind you, go to members area, contact us. The playbooks are there to help you and support you in your lobbying and advocacy. And of course, what we can always do is one-to-one support to members in terms of advocacy and reaching out to policymakers and so on. So with that, I will conclude by giving you an overview on the ILO guide on primary agencies, which is a guide that was developed to support regulation globally. It was a project that we have been involved in for several years, and the report provides an overview of the ILO Convention 181, which is the most important convention of prayers globally, an overview of the legal framework for our industry globally, a deep dive into our industry partner services and cooperation between us and PES, as well as a deep dive into migration and mobility and social dialogue. A lot of data in this report comes from us. So there was a huge exchange of data between WEC and the ILO office. And this was really helpful to get a report that endorses all of our messages, which has, to my reading, no paragraph or no section that we find really concerning. And just as a final point, cherry on the cake, the report makes reference to our work campaign and research as a leading research on the world of work. So again, this is a nice recognition from the ILO of our industry. I will stop here. As you know, I have only 5 more minutes. It is the last WEC conversation of this year. I and we truly hope that you enjoyed this session and you enjoyed these exchanges. I know that attendance could sometimes be higher, but of course the webinars are always made available to our members as recordings. The presentations will be shared, so I truly hope that those who are not here today will be able or are using the webinar as an additional source of information and source of action. Of course, such a webinar is only the start of a process, and it's the start of a discussion on how to improve and how to move forward. Recommendations will take a break in December because we are all very busy with governing body general assemblies and pre-Christmas shopping. So we'll come back in January with the next edition. We are still fine-tuning the agenda for next year, but we most likely have a webinar on the Convention 181 and on regulation. There you will see a lot of input and presentations from Beatrice, Victoria, and myself during this relations format and series. We hope you find it useful, and if you have any ideas on how to improve, how to change, please get back to us. And for now, I wish you a happy day and good rest of the day. Thank you.